It's a new NFL season, and that competition is fierce. President Trump wants to have the name of the Washington Commanders return to its past, a dictionary-defined slur. Let's go back more than a century and talk about a culture of fraud and football. This is Breaking History, and I'm Mark Trahant. Before we go on, be sure to share, comment, and subscribe. President Trump has set the tone. In a recent late-night rant, he called on the NFL to change the name of the Washington Commanders back to its dictionary-defined slur. He said, no name change or no deal on a stadium. Turns out that's nonsense because the city has all the authority, not the president. And the Commanders are winning games, so they really haven't expressed much interest in going backwards.
The name Commanders means something. It means that, it's about players who, are love football, are great at football, hit hard, mentally tough, great teammates. And so it's really meaningful that that name is growing in meaning.
After all, Washington's last Super Bowl was in 1992. More recently, the president posted a note about the NFL's new rules being sissy. You see, Trump wants an NFL the way it was. Here's the thing. There's a great history about how this weekend pastime started off in petty crimes and scams.
Scam is the right word, and this was something that I wish we had known before we went to the district court in our case against the vile former name of the Washington football team.
Suzan Harjo is the namesake in Harjo et al. V. Pro Football, Inc. She has pushed sports teams to drop their dehumanizing stereotypical names, starting with Little Red at the University of Oklahoma. That was the first mascot to go in 1970. There is so much more to Suzanne's career. She's a writer, a poet, and a recipient of the Presidential Medal of Freedom. She's Cheyenne and Muskogee. She knows about as much as anyone about the Washington team's history. This is a bit complicated, so let me start with Pop Warner. He started coaching the Carlisle Indian Industrial School in 1907. The first few seasons were tough, so much so that after a broken leg on the field, the school backed away from the sport. But that changed by 1911. Carlisle had an 11-1 record, packing some 20,000 fans into games playing Harvard, Penn, West Point. The Harvard game was particularly famous because Carlisle won with the hidden ball trick. Many of those early Carlisle players would go on to play and shape in what became the Professional National Football League, including its first president, Jim Thorpe. But there was an undercurrent of coaching and boarding school fraud. A 1914 investigation by Congress examined the famous coach. New York Times in 1982 put it this way: special privileges, excessive gifts, and cash payments to athletes. The recent proposals that athletes be considered quasi-professionals attached to the college and given the opportunity to attend classes, they were all part of Pop Warner's forward-looking program at Carlisle. He was light years ahead of his time. Pop Warner was kind of a crook, and he was loved because his cheating resulted in wins. That brings us to the other part of the story, William Lone Star Dietz. In the legend, at least the one told by the Washington Football Club, he is the reason for the team's old name. Lone Star was the reason the team had a dictionary-defined slur, supposedly to honor him. It's cited as fact in Dietz's College Hall of Fame induction. What we do know is around the time of the 1904 World's Fair in St. Louis, Dietz was reborn as a Sioux, and he began crafting a fabulous biography. That he was the son of a half-breed Ogallala woman named Julia One Star, or Lone Star, who had met Dietz's father, W.W., and gave birth to a daughter and then Lone Star. This is from historian Linda Wagner in an essay in Montana, the magazine of Western history. Dietz's story was so convincing that he was recruited to play at Carlisle Indian School in Oklahoma.
Lone Star Dietz, after leaving Carlisle and leaving Haskell under the scrutiny and the glare of investigative reporters for not being native, was recruited for Carlisle. Ended up there as a ringer by Pop Warner, the coach there, who was the beloved coach for a while until it came out that he was bringing in all of these big, older white males to play football alongside the really super talented as well native people, Jim Thorpe and others who were on the team, making it a wonderful team, beating everyone. Lone Star Dietz, by association, was saying that he was native, and he was not part of the scandal.
There were two other twists to this story. First, Dietz began pretending that he was another athlete by the name of James One Star. He even began writing James's sister, Sally Eaglehart, letter after letter as her brother. By 1919, Dietz was now the coach for the Washington State University Cougars. He was well known as the Indian coach, and he led that team to its first ever Rose Bowl victory. To make his story convincing, he began adding details from his life from what he knew about James One Star.
James One Star died in battle. His sister and his uncle were not told he was dead, despite the fact that his sister kept writing letter after letter after letter to Carlisle and to the Indian agent about him and South Dakota. He was given, all that information was kept from the family, but William Dietz, whose parents, it turned out, were German-American on both sides and had never been to South Dakota, were not Sioux of any kind, were not native of any kind, and he kept making up more elaborate stories, but he was given that identity of James One Star, despite the age discrepancy. And he was one of those ringers brought in by Pop Warner. He married, they very quickly, as the scandal was erupting around these other white ringers, he was eased off the football team and put in as a student of Carlisle as an art student. And eventually he courted and married Angel Decorah, the real Indian, and started claiming part of her story, her history, her origin history that she had given and recorded and first-person interviews and writings. So he was copying her information, and as well as James One Star's. And eventually, he began to write to Sally Eaglehart, his sister, as her brother James One Star. And as he was doing that, he was also trying to get his enrollment number, his agency, his land allotment number. He was trying to get all of this information.
Not everyone believed that story. A federal investigation uncovered that Dietz was, in fact, a white person born in Barron County, state of Wisconsin, and a natural-born citizen of the United States. The federal government charged him with a crime because he used that information to avoid the draft for World War I, claiming he was a non-citizen tribal member. Remember, the Citizenship Act was not enacted until 1924. The trial was bizarre.
And there is in existence a 75-page FBI investigative report after having interviewed the parents, after having interviewed aunts and uncles and witnesses in his town in Wisconsin, and after they had run down all his preposterous stories.
It took place in Spokane, Washington. It was national news, and crowds gathered trying to make their way into the courtroom.
Sally Eaglehart was a witness, and she came into court saying, "You're not my brother. Why have you been lying to me, writing to me as my brother?" Not only was he lying about not being native, but he was lying about everything, about who he was to his sister, which is a cruel, cruel kind of thing to do. And then he was a scoundrel. He was a scammer, a criminal, trying to get James One Star's lease money and then trying to get his land. So this is not a person who should be in the Football Hall of Fame.
During the first trial, Dietz told the story that his Wisconsin mother was not his real mother, and that there was a secret about his birth. He also pressed his sister for an affidavit. She refused, and in the courthouse, Dietz badgered her to the point where she would cry. Nonetheless, the back and forth of their letters was entered as evidence. Another witness, William White Bear, asked him a question in Lakota. When he couldn't answer, White Bear said he was no Sioux. The prosecution said Dietz had not assumed the role of an Indian until he entered Carlisle Indian School, and then he began to impersonate James One Star. The trial judge told jurors that they could not consider if Dietz really was Indian, only if he believed himself to be an Indian. They could ignore all kinds of facts, including a story his mother told about an affair that might have resulted in an Indian baby, or his claims about James One Star. The jury debated for 20 hours and failed to reach a verdict. When the charges were refiled, Dietz appeared before the judge and pleaded no contest. Then he went on his business and continued coaching. And as Wagner writes, for the rest of his life, he continued to promote himself as Lone Star Dietz.
Who knows what happened? George Preston Marshall was the first owner of the Washington Washington football team way back when, and he was a known bigot. He did have some Native players later. The question is, did he know that William Lone Star Dietz was a scammer or not? Since he only stayed there 11 months, I wonder what happened that he left so quickly. Or did his past catch up with him? Or did Marshall find out and then jettisoned him? We don't know. There's much more to know about this entire story and incident. What we do know is that he had never been to South Dakota. He was a full-blooded German-American man, and that he had assumed this identity of a prior deceased student, even with his relatives, and by writing, not in person, and that was confirmed in court, and that he was someone who had scammed his art teacher and taken her history, things that she experienced on the reservation in her lifetime, a real person, a real Winnebago person, and he had made that his own biography, his own identity. How much could he have loved her, and did she find out, and is that the reason she didn't go with him to Pullman, and yet stayed on the East Coast and went to another school? And she died around the same time as the trial. And there are things that we know for sure that are confirmed and rock solid. And there are other things about how the people thought and what they did, what their motivations were, and what they knew when, that are perhaps unknowable. But who knows? Maybe Angel Decorah left a journal that will appear someplace. Maybe someone will really expose Pop Warner for the scoundrel he was. It could not have been, this identity theft of James One Star could not have been accomplished by William Dietz without the assistance of the coach, Pop Warner, and the superintendent, Richard Pratt, of the Carlisle Military Institute, Carlisle Indian Industrial School, which was the prototype for the worst of the federal Indian boarding schools. I really urge people for that point to read about Pop Warner, to read the excellent book about Jim Thorpe by David Marinas called Path Lit by Lightning, which was a translation of his Indian name, his Sock and Fox name, because he does an expose of Pop Warner as being the real culprit in the stripping of medals from that Jim Thorpe won honestly in the Olympics as what many have called the greatest athlete of the century. One thing that in our lawsuit, the attorneys for the other side, for the Washington Harvard franchise, they called people on the Rosebud Reservation and at Oglala, Lakota, in South Dakota, who were named One Star, who were descendants and relatives and part of the Tioshbaye, the extended family of James One Star.
One of them, an elder, One Star, and his attorney, Bob Gile, called Suzanne, reporting that lawyers from the Washington NFL franchise went to Mr. One Star's home.
And he said they had a paper that they wanted him to sign that said, "My name is One Star, and William Dietz, William Lone Star Dietz, is our relative. He's part of our family," and so on. We know him and love him and respect him and all of that. And he said they brought boxes and boxes of jackets with the team name on it and good, really solid winter jackets and sweatsuits and T-shirts. And he said all the kids loved the clothes because they fit really well and they were warm and they just loved it. They wanted in this letter for Mr. One Star to say that he loved the name of the Washington football team. And he said our kids were running around with everything that said that word, which we don't like, but I told him I couldn't sign the letter. And I said, what did they do? And he said, well, they went away with really long faces. So I thought that was a fascinating kind of way that even in the modern time, they were trying to, the football franchise was trying to reinforce their propaganda and bogus story that he was an actual Lakota person and that he was descended from people in that extended family of one stars.
And this is the propaganda we still see in the Hall of Fame. I'm Mark Trahant, and this is Breaking History. Be sure to subscribe, share, and comment.